Hey, this is Adam. Welcome to my Rare Classic Car channel. On another cold day in the Midwest, the weekend weather here stinks. There's snow blowing in on the porch, so I'm not going to stay out here for too long. But I wanted to at least introduce this video that I made on one of the most controversial cars of all time. And one that I personally own and I like. The 1980 to 85 Cadillac Seville, aka the Bustleback or the Slantback. Some people love it, some people hate it. It's a very polarizing car, but no matter where you fall on that spectrum, you can't mistake the car for what it is. It is most certainly a Cadillac. So let's talk about it, some of the cool elements, the design, the underhood components and engineering, some of the flaws, and also some of the things that you can definitely enjoy if you happen to select wanting to own one. Hope you enjoy this segment, and thanks for watching. Well, let's talk about a car that people either love or hate, but irrespective of what they think of it, they can't mistake it for what it is. The 1980 to 85 Cadillac Seville, aka the Bustleback or the Slantback. The Seville underwent a revolution for 1980, changing in many ways aside from just the styling. For instance, the vehicle went from being rear-wheel drive to front-wheel drive. It also went from having a leaf spring rear solid axle suspension to independent rear suspension. And in the front, it went from having coil springs over shocks to torsion bars, similar to the other GM front-wheel drive vehicles, including the Tornado, Riviera, and Eldorado. Though the Seville shared an almost identical 114-inch wheelbase and 205-inch length versus its predecessor, the interior of this new Seville felt notably roomier inside, due to not only the switch to front-wheel drive, which gave the driver and passenger a front flat floor and the rear passengers a flatter floor, but better space and packaging in this second generation than the first generation. To that point, the trunk, which appears to be relatively small in this Bustleback Seville, is actually the same size as the predecessing Seville, and even has more usable cubic feet of space. The Seville's design is credited to chief designer Kady, who led Cadillac Advanced Studios in 1968 before being transferred to Buick in the early 70s, and then back to Cadillac in 1974, where he remained chief designer until 1988. Wayne had been working on this Bustleback design for some time, all the way back to 1967, for use as an Eldorado or two-door replacement. And it was originally thought to be a replacement theme for what would later become the 1971 Eldorado. However, when the corporation's product planning arm determined that the 71 Eldorado would be a derivative of the B-body or GM's full-size vehicle, the Bustleback and its proportions just could not fit on something that wide and long, and so it was shelved until later proposals came along. One of these proposals was actually for a car called the Cadillac LaSalle, which later evolved into the 1976 Seville. However, at the time the proposal was made, Cadillac thought that they could not sell a small car for a higher price than the larger cars, and thus labeling it the LaSalle, similar to the use of the LaSalle brand many years prior as a lower-end Cadillac. Obviously, the final design of the 1976 to 79 Seville took on a much different form from this proposal, perhaps in part because its chief proponent, Kady, had transferred to the Buick studios, where he was responsible for putting, let's call it a mini Bustleback on the 1974 Riviera, and also the full-size Buicks like the Electra at the time, before returning to Cadillac as the chief designer of Cadillac Studios in 1974. In designing the second-generation Seville, Wayne finally got his wish to execute the Bustleback theme with the blessing of his leadership in Cadillac general management, although it was not without controversy. Some either loved the design or some hated it, but it obviously made it through to production. When released in 1980, this Seville had a tough act to follow. The previous generation Seville had come off of a highly successful sales year, selling 53,487 units. The base price of that Seville in 1979 was $16,224. Just 1 year later, this new second-generation Seville would be slapped with a $20,477 base price, an increase of almost $4,000 in 1 year. By contrast, the sister Eldorado vehicle, which had a base price of $14,668 in 1979, only retailed, and I say only loosely, for $16,141 in 1980. So there was roughly a $4,000 base price gap between the Eldorado and its Seville sibling. Some of this base price gap could be attributable to increased standard equipment, including, for better or worse, the Olds 350 cubic inch diesel being standard in the Seville, while Cadillac's reliable and smooth 368 cubic inch V8 was now the standard motivating force behind the Eldorado, having replaced Oldsmobile's 350 cubic inch V8 outfitted with fuel injection. Unfortunately, the Olds diesel would remain standard equipment in the Seville for 2 years, both in 1980 and 1981, and never really got a great standard engine over the course of the 1980 to 1985 model years, as in 1982, the Olds diesel was replaced with none other than the infamous HT, or hook and toe, 4100 V8 engine. There were a series of no-cost options that one could get, including in 1980 a Cadillac 368 cubic inch fuel-injected V8 outside of California, or still the Olds 5.7-liter V8 in California that was fuel-injected. And in 1981, as a no-cost option, one could get the also beloved V8 6.4 368 cubic inch engine. In both of these years, a Buick 4.1-liter V6, a derivative of the now famous 3.8-liter V6, was offered as a credit option and was probably, at least in 1981, the most reliable of the engines that was available. The Cadillac 368 was a very reliable and durable engine, having started life in 1968 as a 472 cubic inch V8 before being enlarged to 500 cubic inches, then subsequently downsized to 425 cubic inches in 1977 and 368 cubic inches in 1980. For transmissions, the Seville always used the turbohydromatic 325 transmission that in the early years had 3 speeds and in the later years was a 4-speed overdrive transmission. While it was okay, it was certainly not a turbohydromatic 425 from the standpoint of durability. So while it's clear the underhood choices didn't always suit the Seville, arguably the exterior styling as well as the interior styling was unmistakably Cadillac. There were a choice of 2 different interiors and 2 different trims of the overall car. There was the base car, and then there was the Elegante version. A buyer could choose from 3 potential color combinations for an Elegante Seville, the first being sable black with Sheffield gray fire mist, the second Sheffield gray fire mist with Norfolk gray, and the third Canyon rock with desert sand fire mist. Interestingly, in this particular generation of Seville, the combination of sable black with Sheffield gray fire mist was inverted from the previous generation, which was black over silver, with this generation Elegante being silver over black. But either way, and with any color scheme, the Elegante was an especially rich-looking vehicle, and it gave Cadillac buyers something to lust for beyond the base car, and also a reason to pay more money. Other interesting facts and figures for this generation Seville include 1-year-only faux wire wheel covers in 1980. You'll notice that the center design sits quite pronounced from the spokes. This was redesigned in 1981 as customers complained that when they were going through the car washes that it sounded like their wheels were going to be ripped off the rims. 1980 was also the only year in which the body side molding was not standard equipment. This became standard equipment in 1981 as the designers felt that the car just looked better with it. On the interior, from 1980 to 1983, the vents are outlined in chrome-plated plastic. Starting with the 1984 model year, the chrome-plated plastic was dropped, and the vents are just simply black. There were also a number of revisions to the taillights and the grille theme over time. The grille, interestingly, in the early years had a pronounced cap over top of it to distinguish it from the Eldorado, which actually used the same hood as the Seville, as well as the windshield and numerous interior components like the dash. So what's it like to own one of these Sevilles, and what should you look for when trying to buy one? Well, I can tell you from firsthand experience that the ride is really, really good in these Cadillacs. You go over bumps quite smoothly. They are well isolated from the road with minimal road and wind noise. The steering has a very light effort and touch and is quite quick with a 14-to-1 steering ratio. However, I wouldn't say they ride as well as contemporaneous Lincolns of the era. And in terms of overall reliability, there are a number of things to look out for. In particular, if you have the 350 Olds V8 diesel, these engines never had great water separation systems, or in some cases, any water separation system from the factory, which was a big faux pas in the day when diesel fuel in particular was not of that high of quality. Those engines also had trouble with the injection pumps, and early ones had head bolt failures and consequent head gasket failures being pretty common. But by this time, some of that had been resolved with the introduction of what was called the DX block, which was a stronger design from versus what was originally introduced in 1978 when the Olds diesel came out. The Cadillac Seville is equipped with the 368 cubic inch engine, whether that's in 1980 without the V864 or 1981 with the V864. Those are good engines and are quite reliable. If you have a V864, you can simply disable the system by unhooking one wire, and it's no big deal. It's quite reliable and just fine. However, from 1982 to 1985 model years, this car does have the infamous HT4100 engine. And my best advice is not necessarily to stay away from the car, but you want to make sure that you get one with low miles, that's been well taken care of and babied. And when you own it, you want to ensure that you change the coolant every 2 to 3 years, and you use the coolant sealant supplement tabs, which are the same as the bars leaks tabs, whenever you change the coolant. This is factory service procedure on these engines and must be followed. I will also say that the rear disc brakes on these Sevilles are a bit of a pain in the butt, and sometimes the calipers tend to seize. They're not that easy to adjust. They're supposed to be self-adjusting when you engage the emergency brake, but they aren't always, or the emergency brake activating lever freezes. In general, the rear brakes on these cars just aren't great. They do stop well when they work, but those systems are somewhat troublesome. And then there are some electronic niggles, like these use a orangey yellow display for the climate control computer and the radio, and often light segments will burn out. But good news is these cars also have an onboard diagnostic computer for many of the years, which you can access by holding the off and warmer buttons on the climate control panel, and that allows you to step through all the engine sensors and check to see what they're reading. And if you have a V864 equipped car and you're in diagnostic mode, you can even activate the 8, 6, and 4-cylinder modes manually and override the computer to do so. So it can be a little bit fun. I've had my Seville for a number of years. It's been relatively trouble-free, and I will say that wherever you go, you certainly get looks. Some people give the big thumbs up. Some people just stare at you. But unquestionably, this car is a Cadillac for better or worse, and it deserves its place in history. It did admittedly not achieve the sales figures of the previous generation. It never hit anything over its lifetime that really even hit the 50,000 plus mark that the previous generation Seville did. At most, it hit almost 40,000 units in 1984 and 1985 when it sold 39,997 in 1984 and 39,756 in 1985, but was not quite the sales success that the previous generation was, perhaps in part because the base price had started so high. However, whatever the reason, a 1980 to 1985 Seville is not a car to necessarily shy away from if you really want one. They are very enjoyable, they look unique, and there's just nothing like them on the road today. So if you have an itch to scratch for one, go and find one. Make sure, my best advice is find one with low miles. Try to get one with a 368 cubic inch engine if you can. But if not, just make sure that you get one that's been well taken care of, babied, and has relatively low miles on it. Hope you enjoyed this review of Cadillac's second generation Eldorado. Thanks again for watching, and take care. Thanks for watching this video on the 1980 to 85 Seville. If you liked it, please ensure to hit the like button as well as drop a comment, as that helps the YouTube algorithm serve this up to more people like you. And if you haven't yet subscribed, click the circular icon of the 67 Buick Riviera at the top left, and check out the 2 thumbnail videos at the bottom left and right for some suggestions from YouTube for you to watch. Thanks again for watching.